History of a Teacher. My Famous Fault. Chapter 18. Umbridge's Mistake. Monday morning, Yugi made his way towards the Great Hall in an unusual good mood. That weekend had been surprisingly silent and peaceful. Rebecca had spent her time with Tracy, Dean, and Peter, thus Yugi and Atem had pretty much been for themselves. He had expected to find the teacher's lounge empty, as it was most days, since the other teachers tended to eat breakfast early, but today it wasn't. A gigantic man was standing in the lounge, his back towards Yugi. The man, who was at least 3 times as tall as Yugi, was making his way towards the Great Hall, but when he heard Yugi, he turned around. To Yugi's horror, the man didn't have a face. A second later, Yugi realized that the man did have a face. It was only covered with an untidy beard, hiding it. "How are you?" he asked Yugi. "I'm Yugimoto, the history teacher," Yugi said, feeling even smaller than he usually did. "Who you?" "Ah," the giant said and held out a hand. "My name is Rubius Hagrid. Teach care of magical creatures. You're the newbie." Yugi's entire arm disappeared into Hagrid's hand, and for a moment he was afraid that his shoulder would shatter as they shook hands. "I suppose so," Yugi said and smiled a bit. His instincts told him that this man was as harmless as a kitten, despite his appearance. "Dumbledore told me about you," Hagrid grumbled as they together started to walk towards the Great Hall. "Said you had quite some influence on the students' way of thinking. He said you changed things." "Is Dumbledore aware of the fact that you are telling me this?" Yugi wondered, suppressing a smile. The giant man got a slightly horrified look on his face and shook his head ashamed. "Nah, I shouldn't have told you that," he said, and did his best to sneak away through the door towards the Great Hall, but Yugi put himself in front of Hagrid. "Just tell me one thing. Did I change things in a good or bad way? Dumbledore won't talk to me. He avoids me. I don't know why, and frankly, I don't care. In fact, the only reason I noticed that he avoided me was that when I accidentally put half the 5th years in a state of hysteria, he didn't react. I do my best, but I screw up a lot. So tell me, does he wish he never hired me, or is he glad he did?" Atem just stared at Yugi in surprise. Throughout the rant, he had tried to protest, but Yugi had completely ignored the spirit and continued to question the dark-haired man in front of them. Hagrid just stared at the Japanese teacher and said, after a couple of seconds thinking, "Dumbledore knows what he does. He thought twice before hiring you. You'll just have to trust him. Just talk to him." Yugi sat and nodded. "Sorry, it's been a tough week. I shouldn't have reacted that way. It's nice to meet you." Yugi turned away and walked into the Great Hall, his shoulder pulled up and his head held low, like he used to walk through school when Jonoji and Andas bullied him. That was such a long time ago now. Hagrid followed him, and with what Yugi supposed was meant to be a gentle pat on the back, he said, "Nice to meet you too. We all have our bad days." Yugi slid into his seat and couldn't help but smile when he saw the students' reaction on the appearance of this giant called Rubius Hagrid. The now Quidditch band, Fred and George Weasley, sprinted up the aisle between the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff table, closely followed by Lee Jordan. They shook the man's hand with exclaims of delight and joy. Peter Lapard did the very same thing and threw Yugi a short greeting too as he turned to walk back to his seat. Despite the many excited and happy greetings Hagrid received, Yugi couldn't help but notice that not all were happy about his return. He noticed a couple of Gryffindor girls shook their heads, and some Slytherins and Hufflepuffs threw each other a gloomy look. Some threw Hagrid right out frightened glances. Yugi frowned and mused, together with Atem, over the mixed reception. Then Atem pointed towards Umbridge. "Look at her. She doesn't seem pleased." The fact was that Umbridge looked far from pleased. She looked repulsed. The conversation Yugi had had with Madame Hooch before Umbridge's inspection came to mind. "You know," he started, "Hagrid is very, very large. Do you think he's perhaps a giant?" "No, it's not possible. I don't know much about giants, but I think we'd recognize one. Perhaps he's part giant. That would explain why Umbridge is being so hostile," Atem said, and kept looking at Umbridge intensely. He noticed that she kept throwing Hagrid glances, and the very time she caught herself throwing such a glance, she resolutely turned away. "I wonder what happened to his face," Yugi mused and looked thoughtfully at the part giant. "You know, Yugi, once upon a time, that would have been the first thing you'd have asked," Atem remarked, receiving a very displeased glare from Yugi. Tuesday, Harry made his way towards Hagrid's cabin, heavily muffled against the cold. He was very worried about what would happen if Hagrid pulled another stunt like the blast-ended Scroots, and that Umbridge would sack him. The chance that Umbridge would sack him was large enough as it was. It didn't have to improve. Hagrid appeared with half a dead cow over his shoulder as the students warily approached his cabin. "We're working in here today," Hagrid called out and gestured toward the Forbidden Forest with his head. "Bit more sheltered, and a way that prefer the dark." A murmur of worried voices appeared and disappeared as Hagrid convinced them that they were trained. Carefully, they followed him into the forest. After about 10 minutes of walking, they reached a place in the forest that was as dark as twilight. Hagrid dropped the cow on the ground and encouraged the students to step closer. Gather round, he urged. "Now, they'll be attracted by the smell of the meat, but I'm going to give a call anyway, just 'cause they'll like to know it's me." None of the students were calmed down by that statement and kept peering around nervous as Hagrid started to shriek. After a couple of minutes, a giant skeletal black horse with creepy white eyes and bat-like wings emerged from between the trees. It bowed its head and started tearing at the flesh of the dead cow. After a few seconds, Ron whispered, "What does he call again?" The class, with the exception of Neville and a Slytherin boy, were still looking around nervously. "Oh, and here comes another one," Hagrid exclaimed happily. "Now!" Whatever Hagrid was about to say was interrupted by the two horses, who raised their heads from the cow and started to walk to the right of the class, away from them. The thing that had called their attention was no one else but Professor Muto himself. The first one of the horses walked all the way towards the teacher with the tricolored hair, and sniffed his shoulder. To everyone's great surprise, Professor Muto patted the black being and turned his attention towards Hagrid. "Such magnificent creatures! What are they?" "There ain't nothing there," Malfoy sneered. "You're putting So, you can see him, can't you?" "Who else can?" Hagrid asked the class, ignoring Malfoy enough to tear his gaze from the black horse that was currently resting its dragonish head on the professor's shoulder, seemingly completely relaxed. Harry, Neville, and the Slytherin boy raised their hands. "Yup, I knew you could, Harry. They're Thestrals." Hermione gave a soft "Oh!" that told Harry that she knew all about them. Hagrid continued, "Hogwarts got it all out of them, here now. Who knows?" "But they're really, really unlucky!" Parvati exclaimed, interrupting Hagrid. "They're supposed to bring all sorts of horrible misfortune to people who can see them. Professor Trelawney told me once." Professor Muto raised an eyebrow at her statement, still petting the Thestral that was momentarily purring under his hands. Hagrid started chuckling and interrupted Parvati in his turn. No. Harry didn't pay Hagrid much more attention and was watching Professor Muto instead, who was whispering in the Thestral's ears, as if they had been close friends their entire lives. He didn't seem to be the least afraid, despite the pointy teeth and macabre white eyes. "Right, who can tell me why some of you can see him and some can't?" Hagrid asked and beamed when Hermione's hand shot into the air. "The only people who can see in Thestrals," she started, and fell silent when she noticed Professor Muto's eyes on her. She spelled it and continued, "Are people who have seen death." "Oh," Professor Muto whispered and stopped petting. "I didn't know that." He dropped his hand and looked at the being before him. "No wonder people do not like you," he whispered in the Thestral's ear before it turned around and started to tear at the cow again, together with 3 others. A high-pitched and overall disliked voice said. When she received no reaction from Hagrid, she repeated the sound. "Ah, hello," Hagrid said, smiling when he discovered the source of the sound. "You received the note I sent to your cabin this morning?" she asked with a slow voice, as if talking to a complete retard. "Telling you that I would be inspecting your lesson?" "Oh, yeah, glad you found the place all right. Well, as you can see, or I don't know, can you? We're doing with Thestrals today." "I'm sorry," Professor Umbridge said loudly with a tone Harry didn't like at all. "What did you say?" One of the newly arrived Thestrals threw Umbridge a long glance before making its way over towards Professor Muto, who treated this Thestral with just as much care as the previous one. Hagrid looked confused for a while. Thestrals. Big winged horses." He flapped a bit with his arms. Umbridge looked disapproving and took a note on a clipboard. Carefully, she spelled what she wrote down for everyone to hear. "Has to resort to crude sign language." Hagrid looked flustered, and Harry, who was also keeping an eye on the history teacher, saw that Professor Muddo's gaze had narrowed into a glare that didn't promise much good. It was an attentive and passive glare that, in less than a second, could switch to dangerous and offensive. "Well, anyway," Hagrid said, turning to the class. "What was I saying?"
"Appears to have poor short-term memory,"
Umbridge muttered. Hagrid bravely decided to ignore her and started telling about how the herd had started when Umbridge interrupted him.
"Are you aware," Umbridge said loudly, "that the Ministry of Magic has classified Thestrals as dangerous?"
"They don't seem very dangerous to me," a soft voice said, and everyone looked at the short person to whom the voice belonged. "In fact, they are quite gentle. Can you see them?" Professor Muddo kept petting the rather intimidating horse, but was staring Umbridge straight in the eyes. "Can you see the way they behave this very instant? How calm and relaxed? They seem to thrive here in this space, in this company."
"Professor Muddo, what are you doing here?"
she asked with a high-pitched voice and drew herself to her full length, which made her easily taller than Professor Muddo. Professor Muddo didn't look impressed, but his hostile expression vanished when he came to think of whatever he was doing here. I was here to deliver a note to Tracy Davis," Professor Muddo said, to Harry's surprise, sounding shy. He moved towards the Slytherin girl and gave her a piece of parchment.
"Who's it from?"
Davis asked, and reached out to take the piece of paper, but before she could take it, it flew out of Professor Muddo's hand into Umbridge's outstretched short fingers.
"That's what I'd like to know. It's highly unusual for teachers to walk into the Forbidden Forest to leave a student a note,"
Umbridge said, and chuckled as she opened the folded piece of paper.
"Now let's see. It reads, 'Dear Tracy, your father and I left today. We wanted to say goodbye in person, but unfortunately that's not possible. Your grandma fell ill, and we returned as soon as possible. It's nothing serious, otherwise I wouldn't tell you like this. You know that. But it's because she wanted us to come. I pray that things stay the way they are. Considering circumstances, you've been quite lucky by meeting some of the few people that are free from prejudice, and will stand by you no matter what. I admit that I was wrong. You have no better of a loan, and not everyone will condemn you for who and what you are. This is a lesson neither you nor me should have had to learn the way we did, but we did, and little can change that. My idiocy almost got you and an innocent bystander hurt, so take my advice and stop listening to me and just do what your heart tells you. With love, Mum."
Everyone present was looking at Tracy either with wonder or pity. Dean moved closer to her and put a protective arm around her. Harry didn't understand anything of what Tracy's mother had written to her, but he couldn't understand how Umbridge had the heart to invade someone's secrets like that and expose them to the entire class.
"What did she mean?"
Umbridge asked in a sugar-sweet voice. Harry wasn't the only one throwing Umbridge a hateful glare. He had never seen Dean so furious before, but they all stood silent, awaiting the outcome of this unexpected twist.
"You must understand, I am merely worried about you. We can only be friends if you are honest with me, and I must know what your problem is to be able to help you. You wouldn't want anyone to get hurt, would you?"
Umbridge carried on, and Harry saw how uneasy the Slytherin girl was. Harry had been quite distant from Tracy even during the DA meetings, partly because Tracy was good at what she did and didn't need much help to succeed with what she tried, but mostly because she was a Slytherin. He still didn't trust her.
"Ah!"
Tracy started, but her voice trailed off before her voice had even reached out.
"Excuse me, dear, what did you say?"
Umbridge wondered and smiled as she cocked her head. Professor Muddo still had a hand on the thestral, but wasn't petting anymore. He was listening attentively, and Harry could see an emotion in those purple eyes he had never seen before. It wasn't anger, it was grief. It were the eyes of someone who wanted to see the good in the world and was proven that there were people without feelings of kindness.
"Ah!"
Tracy said louder this time, but Dean stopped her by grabbing her arm. He turned his back towards Umbridge and looked Tracy straight in the eyes.
"There is no need for you to tell her anything. This is not something she needs to know, and she can't force you to say anything. This is nothing short of an assault. Isn't it, Dumbledore? She has no right to read our personal mail out in front of class."
Then Tracy's eyes narrowed into a determination that Harry had never seen in the shy Slytherin's eyes before. She almost shoved Dean out of the way, took a step forward, raised her eyes, and looked down on Umbridge.
I know that I don't have to tell her anything, but why would I hide it? Should I be ashamed of who I am? No. She can know. She can know that I neither fear her nor will be ashamed in front of her. If she thinks she can break me by trying to uncover all my secrets in front of the class, she's wrong, Tracy answered Dean, although she stayed focused on Umbridge, and then she looked behind her at the students and gave them all a small smile before she turned back to Umbridge. The reason Mum thought I was better off alone is because of people like you, she said, and took another step towards Umbridge. The prejudice lays buried so deep in your core that there is no way to remove it. Instead, we have to take your endless insults. Luckily for me, there are people who are free from such prejudice, which was proven to me not that long ago. Don't you get it, Professor Umbridge? I'm a werewolf. Harry's jaw dropped, and his wasn't the only one. Several students took a step backwards in shock, and several meaningful glances were exchanged. Harry, Ron, and Hermione also exchanged such a meaningful glance. No! Dumbledore has reached the bottom! How can he allow such a dangerous creature in this already hopeless school, you filthy half-breed! Umbridge screamed in. She raised her wand, her hand shaking. Dean quickly went to stand next to Tracy. Don't call her that! She's the nicest person I've ever met! Hagrid and all the students were far too surprised or confused to be able to foresee what would come next. Umbridge's hand steadied. Mr. Thomas! Detention! Now get back! Such a foul creature will not be allowed in Hogwarts! Before Dean even had the time to step back, Umbridge threw her curse. Reducto! Hermione screamed in horror, and Harry was panting heavily in shock. What kind of person would use such a curse on a human being? The curse didn't hit its target. Every student present watched as no one less than Professor Muto shoved Dean and Tracy out of the way. The curse hit the puzzle around the teacher's neck and rebounded in the approximate direction of Umbridge, who with a loud yelp jumped aside, and the curse missed her, demolishing a tree. Are you two all right? Professor Muto asked the two teens, now laying on the ground of the forest. Dean and Tracy got to their feet, and it was visible to anyone that Tracy was in shock. Tears of fear were running down her face, and Dean hugged her tight, comforting her. It's okay, he whispered. It's okay. It was just as much an answer on Professor Muto's question as words meant to soothe. To Harry's surprise, Professor Muto's eyes flared crimson, and the look of grief had been replaced with disgust. It was a change so quick and unexpected that it was as if Professor Muto suddenly was someone else. Though Harry supposed that someone with a history like that of Professor Muto had to be a multilateral person. But those eyes... Everything seemed to have changed. Not only Professor Muto's eyes, but his posture and attitude, too. His entire presence. Dolores Jane Umbridge, he spoke, and he sounded just like he had when Umbridge had inspected his class. Harry shuddered, and he wasn't the only one. Professor Muto seemed to be unaware of the students' unease and just carried on. Do you dare to play a game with me? A game? She asked. Murmurs erupted among the students. A game again? Hermione wondered. Last time... Shh! Ron said and put a finger over his lips. I know what you were going to say, Hermione, but I don't care. I don't care what happens to Umbridge. She tried to kill a student. She tried to kill Tracy. I don't care that Professor Muto said that he couldn't control the powers of the shadows. Umbridge deserves to rot in Azkaban for the rest of her life for what she did, and the Ministry isn't going to send her. The only one who is able to stand up to her is Professor Muto, since he doesn't seem to have anything left to lose. Who cares where his power came from? Harry had never heard Ron talk to Hermione like that before, and he and Hermione gawked at Ron. After a second or so, Harry nodded. What Ron said was right. To this point, Professor Muto had only done what was best for them. Though his methods might not always have been the most honorable. Harry laughed a bit at himself. What was honorable, anyway? Hermione shook her head, but didn't argue further. Instead, she walked towards Tracy and Dean to check up on them. No! No more games! Umbridge said, almost pleading. Professor Muto ignored her and continued. Let me introduce you to some friends of mine. Minoan, Equeste, and, let's just call them horsemen. The students watched as out of nowhere 3 creatures appeared. The Thestrals were watching them closely, but didn't seem to be bothered by them. The first creature Harry saw was a centaur. When he looked closer, he saw that what he saw was no centaur at all. He had the body of a horse and the torso of a bodybuilder, but the rest was simply not the way centaurs were. He had a marsh brown pelt, and his human torso was pink.
He had a beard, blue nails, and puny red eyes. Above his ears were two giant red horns, and in his right hand he held a giant lapras, a double-bladed axe. The next creature to appear looked much the same, only had the head of a bull and was dressed in armor, his tail lighter and the shaft of his axe shorter. The third stood out most. The centaur form was still there, but he had gigantic wings, robotic wings. He, or it, Harry wasn't quite sure, was dressed as if he had participated in a sci-fi movie. His armor was blue, and so were his wings. His hair was long and dark. Neither of the three creatures looked very friendly. The students stumbled out of their way. 2 or 3 of the Thestrals went to examine the newcomers, but decided they weren't very interesting and that they were tired of all the drama. They walked away, back into the darkest parts of the forest.
The game is quite simple,
Professor Muto said, not reacting to the commotion the arrival of his 3 friends had caused.
My friends can't stand around. The centaurs will be displeased, very displeased. I'll lead the horsemen out of the forest, that way.
He pointed away from the school, deeper into the forest. He walked towards the one with the short axe and bullhead, and Harry could swear Horseman smiled as the short Japanese put himself next to the giant centaur-like creature.
But isn't that what you just told me? Didn't you want to remove half-breeds from the school? Minoan,
Professor Muto pointed towards the one with the beard.
We'll follow you away from the school ground. He's not very patient, though, so I'd hurry. Just to make it fun, we'll make it a game. The first one to lead my friends out of the school grounds wins. It'll be a race. Simple, ain't it? But you and I, Umbridge, we're just the 2 of us, and I have a third friend who needs to get out before the centaurs get pissed.
Suddenly, Professor Muto turned towards the class. His eyes took in each and every face, and at last his eyes stopped at Tracy.
Miss Davis, would you help me?
Jane looked troubled and Tracy afraid, but she got to her feet and walked towards Professor Muto. No one did any attempt to stop her. "Can I come too?" someone asked from the sidelines. Harry saw that Professor Muto was slightly taken aback by the question, but when he saw who had asked, he smiled and nodded.
I think it's fine.
Hagrid, you can come with us, at least, if Equeste is all right with that,
Tracy said and smiled. Equeste gave a kind of nod at Hagrid and looked down at Tracy gratefully.
We should be right back,
Professor Muto said, turning to the class.
Just wait here. There is one more rule. No magic. That's it.
Excuse me?
Umbridge said, affronted. What makes you think that I'll lead this horrible creature out of the forest, let alone compete with you? The amused smile disappeared from Professor Muto's face, and his crimson glare indulged fear in everyone present. Most of all, Umbridge, who was the target of the glare.
Do you think you have a choice in the matter? Most of all, I'd like to strip your soul from its body and send both of them to separate parts of hell, but that is not something I'd do in front of these students. I could report to Dumbledore or the Ministry about what you did, but that wouldn't lead us anywhere, as Dumbledore is believed to be insane, and Fudge would rather close his eyes to the truth. So instead, we'll play a game. If you win, me and everyone else here will forget about what you did. Otherwise, I'll have to send you to a place worse than hell at your defeat, away from more sensitive eyes. Professor Muto's voice was low, but there was an undertone in it that could kill. It sounded nothing like he had ever sounded in his class. His voice was simply different. If you refuse to play this game, I believe I'll have to force you. Now let's go. The game begins now. Tracy shook the chill off of her and started to walk towards the border of the school grounds, followed by Hagrid and Equeste. They had barely gone 10 meters, and Tracy was already running after them. When they had almost disappeared from sight, Equeste stopped and had a short exchange of words with Hagrid, who lifted Tracy and put her on Equeste. Tracy's laugh, still sounding slightly shaken, echoed through the forest. Professor Muto and Umbridge were still standing in the clearing. I just want to make this clear to you. They are part of the race, not of the game. I'd start moving. Minoan is not very patient.
Horseman and Professor Muto started to walk away.
Remember, no magic.
Within a couple of seconds, the odd pair had disappeared, out of sight too. The students had gathered closer to each other. Parvati had an arm around Lavender. Both were shaking. Hermione was standing next to Dean, who didn't seem to be happy about the fact that Tracy had been taken by a creature, which Harry assumed had to be one of the shadow creatures. Though for some reason, Harry was sure that Tracy and Hagrid would be fine. Ron had sat down, quite pale in the face, though with a determinate look in his eyes. Harry knew that Ron was hoping for Umbridge's loss. He himself wasn't so sure. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle had also sat down. Malfoy as white as a corpse. Seamus also went to stand by Dean. No one was talking yet. They were all highly aware of Minoan and Umbridge. Minoan was standing in between the students and the hated High Inquisitor. He took a step towards the pink-clad woman and made an impatient sound. Umbridge quickly took some steps back and tripped over the bones of the cow that Hagrid had given the Thestrals. "Stop coming closer, you filthy off-breed! Just leave! Do you know who I am?" Minoan didn't react to Umbridge's words and just took some more steps towards her, even less patient. Harry was looking at the situation with a mixture of disbelief and wonder. He had to admit that Professor Murdo has designed this game quite well. He had thrown Umbridge's biggest fears in her face and craved for her to work with them. The only outcome was for her to cheat. Harry knew that, and he was quite sure that Professor Murdo knew that too. As Harry had foreseen, Umbridge raised her wand. "Step back, you rotten creature!"
Taken, tortured, locked away in eternally dark,
Minoan said, and put an axe over his shoulder.
Never rotten, always faithful.
That was the last drop. "But the curse hit Minoan straight in the chest, and the being disappeared in thin air, vaporized into the shadows. A sound of clapping hands appeared from behind the trees. It was as if the clapping person took a moment between every time he brought his hands together. It was a mystical sound, making them all uncomfortable. Every eye was staring towards the source of the sound. Professor Muto stepped out from between the trees, clapping his hands slowly. He had his gaze fixed upon Umbridge. He was alone, and his voice was colder than ice.
But no one can be affected by magic. Though I thought I made clear, no magic. I suppose not. I've warned you before on the effect of cheating, and this time no one will stop me from punishing you. Last time you were lucky and your crime was not bad. Now you've crossed the line only a few persons have crossed before. None of them got away unpunished, and otherwise they'll be punished soon. I'll have no mercy on you. I'm done having mercy. What's going to happen now is a penalty game. A game in which you will be driven to the border of madness. Then you will be thrown over that border, retrieved nearly immediately, and you'll start your journey to become a better person. At least that's the thought. But as I stated, I'm done having mercy. It will not be me who will retrieve you from insanity. Penalty game!
A horrible screaming came from Umbridge, and Professor Muto watched her, seemingly free from emotion. The person staring down on Umbridge as she was wriggling on the ground while screaming in fear simply couldn't be the same person as the one who shyly had given Tracy the note from her mother. For a second, the thought that Tracy was lucky entered Harry's mind. The commotion this action would cause would remove the spotlight from Tracy's uncovered identity. Then he thought of how Umbridge had done an attempt to kill the Slytherin girl, and all the pity he had felt for the toad-like woman that he had felt when he saw her expression of terror was gone with the wind. Parvati was now crying for real, and she wasn't the only one seeking comfort from others.
"This must be the final border,"
Parvati said and sobbed.
"How can any of us take any more?"
Harry wondered what she meant. She had also stated something he didn't really get in the Hog's head. But this time, too, he felt like he agreed. His eyes fell upon Ron, who was one of the few still watching Umbridge. He had a grim expression on his face that Harry didn't like at all. His friend looked like he was getting used to these kinds of things, and that wasn't something Harry wished upon the best friend he had. Except for Umbridge's screaming and Parvati's crying, it was silent. To everyone's surprise, it was Professor Muto who spoke, and Harry noticed that he had retrieved his amethyst eyes and regular voice. "Come on," he said, and walked towards the students. "This class is over." He helped Parvati to his feet. "Are you okay?" Parvati nodded.
"I'm just tired, very tired."
"I understand," Professor Muto said, and for some reason Harry didn't doubt that he was telling the truth. Students helped their friends to their feet and started to make their way towards the castle, as if they were a funeral procession. "Professor, what about Tracy?" Dean asked and looked into the forest. "Hagrid will bring her back. They'll be here around dinner. Don't worry about her. She showed a quest of respect that he's not used to. I'm sure they're having a good time. Way better than us, anyway." Yugi assured him and gave the dark boy a smile. "You already knew about Tracy, didn't you?" Dean nodded. "I'm proud of you for what it's worth. Rebecca knew too, right?" Dean nodded once more. "Yeah, she told me something had happened, but not what. She said that she had promised to keep it silent." "I thought she had told you," Dean said, surprised. "I thought she told you everything. She speaks highly of you. She said appearances can be deceiving." Dean looked behind him, towards where Umbridge was lying. although they were already too far away to even hear her scream. She doesn't tell me everything. A lot. Far more than most people realize, even. But not the things she promised to keep secret. Rebecca and I have both gone through enough to know the importance of true loyalty. Don't doubt Rebecca, Yugi said with a voice that sounded just like Harry felt, drained from all strength. Harry didn't intend to listen in, but he was walking just behind them and couldn't really help it.
What about Professor Umbridge?
Hermione wondered and threw Harry a hasty glance.
What's going to happen to her now?
Professor Muto shrugged and started to walk slower, which parted Ron, Hermione, Dean, Harry, and himself from the rest of the group. I don't know.
What did you do to her?
Hermione pressed on. Professor Muto actually smiled. She's facing herself. She is seeing her own true form, and she doesn't seem to like it. The smile vaporized. What happens now depends on herself. She has the opportunity to learn from what she sees. If she doesn't learn, this will simply have been a horrible punishment to her. If she does, it will have been one of the most important turnpikes in her life. The 4 Gryffindors frowned, each lost in thought. Eventually, Ron spoke. What's a turnpike? Hermione and Dean laughed despite themselves, and the 4 of them caught up with a group of students in funeral mode. When Harry looked behind himself, he saw Professor Muto standing still. He was facing the forest and wasn't aware that he was being observed. We're lost souls in a lost world, and all we do is make it worse. The professor sighed and looked up at the sun. In the sunlight, a single tear glistened.